Morning, everyone. A bit of a mashup of stories this morning. And first, a reaction to the letter and then Trudeau's reaction by an opinion person on the National Post. And they're reporting, quote, Trudeau and his gang of six, a PM undone by his own handiwork. Yeah, there's almost no other way to put it. The Prime Minister seems to be losing his marbles. On Monday, the premiers of 5 provinces and the Northwest Territories sent him a polite, conventional open letter raising familiar concerns with the Liberal government's resource bills, C-69, which creates a new regime for federal review of big infrastructure projects like pipelines, and C-48, the ban on oil tankers traffic along most of BC's coast. The premiers, who included the 3 Prairie Conservatives, Ontario's Doug Ford and New Brunswick's Blaine Higgs, didn't say anything you haven't heard before. They claimed that C-69 is a reform that makes things worse for megaproject investors who are already shying away from Canada, and that, as passed by the House of Commons, it tramples provincial responsibility for resource development. The tanker ban, they add, is just the putrid icing on the toxic C-69 cake. There is some firm language in the Premier's letter. They warned, quote, the federal government must recognize the exclusive role provinces and territories have over the management of non-renewable natural resource development or risk creating a constitutional crisis. C-48 in particular, they say, will have detrimental effects on national unity. This does not seem like an especially outrageous warning to deliver. Canada is, the last time anyone checked, a federation. Because Ford's name is on the letter, the signatories represent more than half the country's population, and in particular the interests of the half in resource, revenue, and jobs. The tanker ban, almost by definition, sacrifices the general welfare of a resource-reliant nation economy and federal treasury for the perceived protection of one thinly populated region. That may be a worthwhile trade-off on utilitarian grounds, but from a national unity standpoint, it is inescapably what it is, a choice between what 2 different groups of Canadians want. But for some reason, as my colleague Dan Braid and Matt Gurney have described, the PM went kind of bananas, calling the signers of the letter, quote, absolutely irresponsible, and accusing them of, quote, threatening national unity by pointing out the disunifying nature of the Liberal bills. Trudeau added that, quote, anyone who wants to be Prime Minister, like Andrew Scheer, needs to condemn those attacks on national unity. Trudeau seems to have decided that attacks on national unity, which consisted entirely of speaking in its defense, were a promising wedge issue. The, quote, will X at long last rise to his feet and denounce Y rhetorical trope is usually reserved for situation in which Y is some hate group or nefarious cult, and maybe that is how Trudeau regards the gang of 6-letter signers. Yet, their offensive epistle actually endorses the Senate's amended version of C-69 and begs for it to be adopted. You'd recall that after hearing its own evidence on the impact of the bill, the Senate split up into its conservative and independent camps, returned with a separate list of legislative improvements, and found that they matched almost perfectly. They were, with relative ease, able to reach agreement on a sober second version of the bill to send back to the House. Is the Senate also to be considered an attacker of national unity? I scroll down. The hard work done by the Senate on Bill C-69 and its relatively aggressive advocacy for revision of C-69 is entirely a product of these changes. The detached independent senators took Trudeau at his word, behaving independently, and lo and behold, found that they agreed with the Conservatives on a bunch of stuff. Now Conservative premiers are praising the Senate's craftsmanship, and Trudeau has no more intelligent or strategic reaction than a sloppy, goofy rant about unity? Ooh. And the column finishes off. It's an opinion piece, but it's an interesting opinion, thinking about how Trudeau reacted to more than 50% of the population's leaders, right? These people were elected recently with strong mandates. They're speaking for the people. It's interesting that Trudeau dismissed them out of hand, right? It's wild. And we're coming up to an election. People are paying attention. More people are paying attention. I've been out door knocking, and people are paying attention. It's interesting. Okay, Global News is reporting I wanted to highlight this because it's so slimy. Reading the headline, and a lot of people read and share headlines, it sounds like a lot of people support government censorship. Yes, governments must crack down on the fake news, Global News is reporting. Quote, more than 60% of web users support governments censoring fake news, Ipsos poll. But spoiler alert, not Canadians. Canadians support it way less. But here we go. We'll find out what this says. 61% of internet users globally support having governments censor fake news, according to a new Ipsos poll. In Canada, though, that number drops to 46%, despite 90% of Canadians saying they've fallen for fake news. I scroll down just a little bit. There's little agreement on who should decide. Oh, you know what? I'll read this paragraph too. According to the fifth CIGI Ipsos Global Survey, which measures internet security and trust among users in 25 countries around the world, 61% of global respondents said they believe governments should be involved in censoring fake news, and roughly 85% said they should support social media sites removing fake posts and accounts. But there is little agreement on who should decide what constitutes fake news. Among all respondents, 17% believed it should be the government, but there is a wide range between respondents in individual countries, from 37% in Indonesia to a low of 7% in Poland. Canadians and American respondents fell on the lower end of the scale, with 10% and 11% respectively, saying that deciding what constitutes fake news should be the purview of the government. So only 10 or 11% of Canadians think that the government should be responsible for regulating fake news. And our government gets around that by saying it's okay, we've impaneled an arm's length group that has nothing to do with the government, but that the government funds, and that the government, we've seen Unifor, right? Like the hand-picked people who were put together for the media $600 million handout. That's how they get around that. Shouldn't be the government, right? So the Canadian government is saying, we're listening to the people. The government's not doing it. It's these people over here. Sure, right. With absolutely no influence at all, except for all the money you're giving them. So the headline reads, lots of people support this. When you dig into it, less than a majority, 46% support some kind of intervention of fake news, but they don't want the government having a hand in it. And I would agree with that. Not that I think that somebody should be watching fake news. I think the floodgates should be open. Everything should be allowed. Absolutely everything. And indexed for search relevance, and not what Google wants to be on the top of the search. Like, really, is this the most relevant thing for my search? Rather than the sanitized Google headlines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's very, very interesting because all of this stuff is layered. How deep is Google complying with government censorship, et cetera, et cetera? There are notifications on Google now that say some search terms have been removed due to government request, et cetera. And I've run into that while reporting my stories, looking for old news articles that I worked on that were censored after the fact. Interesting stuff happening in Canada now, right? So they use these polls, they use these headlines to push a narrative that isn't true. It's not true. So 61% of people in Canada don't support censorship. And when I say that I support some kind of intervention, I mean, talking about it, right? Like opening it all up. And I think I said, let's open it all up. But yeah, man, the way to fight hateful things and hateful speech is to get it all out and say, we had that conversation and here it is, link to it. Boom. There you go. There's 4 hours of discussion on why you're wrong. Boom. No problems. Right? Why not? And if you can't prove them wrong, maybe there's a conversation to be had. If that other person is making good points and has some kind of thing to say, maybe there's something to be gleaned from that. Man. Anyway, here is Elections Canada. And have you heard of this story? I kind of glossed over it. It's a big story. Elections Canada is paying election influencers, and we're going to find out who these people are on June 25th, and we'll get to that in just a second. This person, the Red 8, is tweeting, quote, "Why does Elections Canada need to wait until June 25th to announce who the influencers are? This is so dodgy, words fail me." And this is a Globe and Mail article that he links to, but the Globe and Mail is paywalled, and so I found Post Millennial reporting on the same thing. And it says Trudeau Liberals to release social media influencers on June 25th. So here's just a bit of a primer. It says Elections Canada isn't saying who it's hired to promote voter participation in the upcoming federal election, except that there are 13, quote, social media influencers that include YouTubers, Olympians, TV stars, and musicians. Nobody contacted me, by the way. Not that I know of. Anyway, I'm going to scroll down here, and this is the update. The following is Election Canada complete response to TMP, the Post Millennial, queries on its social media influencers campaign. Elections Canada mandate is to ensure all eligible Canadian electors have the right information they need to register and vote. Our efforts are based on evidence that there are barriers to electoral participation and are not meant to replace the role played by candidates and political parties who have a clear role in reaching out to voters. Young electors tend to have less knowledge of the electoral process and are more likely to say that it's difficult to find information about it. However, they're more comfortable with online resources than older electors. Despite the increase in youth turnout in 2015, young people continue to vote at significantly lower rates than older electors. Elections Canada research shows that young people, especially first-time voters, face significant barriers to participating in federal elections. Canadians who are registered and receive voter information cards are much more informed about their voting options. Registration rates among young Canadians is significantly lower for older Canadians than for older Canadians, and this is the primary focus of the new digital influencer campaign set to launch later this month. Elections Canada wanted to feature a diverse group of social media influencers to appeal to and reach various communities across Canada. It was essential that digital campaign include a mix of influencers with regard to age, gender, ethnicity, community, and interest. Election Canada worked with an influencer agency to develop, plan, and execute the influencer campaign. Selection criteria for the influencer included their eligibility to vote, their nonpartisan status, their social media reach, their availability. No public association to a political party. It'll be interesting to see who they roll out. Election Canada will announce the names of participating influencers on June 25th when we officially launch the campaign. Wild. And I don't know. I don't like that. I think that that's a bad idea, but I think it's spending taxpayer dollars. Yes, awareness is good. No, on one hand, you can't say Facebook and Twitter are abhorrent and terrible and they shouldn't be used in influencing an election. And on the other hand, pay influencers on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and all of these other content things to engage young people. Like, it's one or the other. You don't get to do both. It's really like, do you want these major players having an impact or not? You can't have it both ways. Regular people shouldn't be silenced while you're paying, quote, nonpartisan influencers to influence the election. Seriously. Unbelievable. Okay, and this is the last story for this morning. It says June 11th. This was reported, and it says alleged gang Kingpin may have used Liberal MP's law firm to launder money through BC condo deal. I've long talked about the money laundering and the problem being at the top, not in the middle, right? Like, if you have somebody calling the police all the time and the police show up and go, sorry, I can't do anything about it, they're going to stop calling the police and they're going to just start dealing with it on their own. And every time a money laundering case falls apart in BC, which is all of the money laundering cases, and especially all across Canada, this is happening, and I've reported on this a lot as well, then eventually, I mean, you've got to play ball. If somebody shows up in your office with $9 million in a hockey bag and they say, I want to buy property, I mean, if you call the police, nothing's going to happen anyway. The case will be thrown out. The problem is at the top. The problem is not in the middle. And the Liberals and the Conservatives keep trying to solve this problem in the middle and not at the top. So it's very interesting to watch all this stuff, all this dirty money coming out, and really nobody doing anything about it. It's wild. Okay. Here we go. Global News is reporting, quote, the law firm of Richmond Liberal MP Joe Prashado Solo, sorry about that, facilitated a secretive financial transaction that may have helped an alleged Chinese cartel drug boss launder his unexplained wealth through a Metro Vancouver condo development, a Global News investigation reveals. The service that Salido, I'm going to go with that, Salido firm completed is a so-called Bear Trust joint venture. This type of deal is legal, but a client involved in this case who is a convicted drug trafficker should have raised huge red flags for the Canadian political firm, according to a financial crime expert that reviewed documents obtained by Global News. Bear Trust deals have become extremely controversial in the midst of the BC money laundering scandal because the transactions allow investors to hide their ownership of land in documents only accessible to lawyers. Critics, including BC Attorney General David Eby and Finance Minister Carol James, have called Bear Trust a loophole that helped drive home prices higher and turn BC real estate into a secrecy haven ideal for international criminals seeking to hide dirty money and evade taxes. The land deal, facilitated by a lawyer at the Solido, oh my God, I'm so terrible at names, firm in 2011, and I'm just going to start calling it the firm. Okay, sorry. Involves a company directed by Kwok Chung Tam, an alleged heavyweight in the Big Circle Boys, a powerful mainland China-based drug cartel, according to Canada Border Services Agency, the CBSA, records. The deal was completed while Tam was still serving a conditional sentence for a 2010 drug trafficking conviction, court records show. The Bear Trust allowed Tam to conceal his ownership stake in a $7.75 million purchase of a 3.7-acre property in Coquitlam, BC that sold for $14.8 million in 2015. The records of the firm are among thousands of pages submitted to the federal court by the government and Tam's lawyers as part of his legal battle to stay in Canada. Many of the records, including those about Tam's alleged connection to the Big Circle Boys, have never been tested in court. a case of willful blindness. As Global News has reported, Tam's alleged leadership role with the Big Circle Boys and his alleged deep ties to BC's casino and real estate industries could make him a poster child for the province's public inquiry into the so-called Vancouver model, of transnational money laundering. But the legal services completed by the firm's former practice, which the BC Law Society took custody of in April 2019 for unexplained reasons, could also attract the inquiry's spotlight. That's because the inquiry is expected to examine bare trusts and the regulatory loopholes that exempt Canadian lawyers from reporting suspicious transactions to FINTRAC, Canada's anti-money laundering watchdog. Right? Problems at the top. You're banning lawyers from contacting FINTRAC in certain circumstances, thereby creating a safe haven for money launderers. Back to the article. And while Tam claims to be a legitimate businessman, between 1991 and 2014, Canadian law enforcement and immigration officials allege he was a brazen casino loan shark, heroin importer, and chemical drug lab operator whose source of wealth had been questioned since his arrival in Vancouver in 1988. And the numbered company used by Tam in the Coquitlam Bear Trust deal is directly connected to several Richmond homes targeted by an RCMP drug trafficking investigation in 2006. Also, BC Supreme Court filings from 2010 made it clear that Tam and his sister Ka Ling Tam, another director linked to Tam's numbered development company, were subject to drug trafficking civil forfeiture case. Tam and his sister did not respond in the case, and the government seized about $135,000 in cash found in Tam's Richmond home. How much do you have to be making to not bother worrying about $135,000 in cash just sitting around your house? Back to the article. There was also a media report about raids on Tam's homes and his suspected ties to the Big Circle Boys, including a 2006 Vancouver province story that identified him in a headline as alleged drug boss known to police. These prominent reports were publicly accessible before the 2011 Bear Trust deal was signed. According to the financial crime experts that spoke with Global News, these factors raise questions about whether the firm took reasonable measures to avoid doing business with Tam before completing a real estate transaction that might have been used to launder money. Quote, lawyers need to be asking their clients, how did you make your money? Said Kim Marsh, a former commander of the RCMP International Organized Crime Unit, who now consults foreign governments on appropriate anti-money laundering measures. I scroll down a little bit. Global News has learned that the BC Law Society took control of the firm and company in April, and that the owner, Prashidi Solido, I think that was the best one, is no longer a member of the society, which regulates the BC legal profession. It is not clear if this action is related to the Tam deal or any similar transactions. The society refused to inform Global News why it decided to wind up the firm, and Prashidi Solido himself would not answer questions on why he is no longer a member of the bar. And there's more to this story. It goes really deep, but I don't have any more time to go really into it. But please go and read. There's lots of really interesting stuff. I don't have any more time to read it out. I read it, and here we are. That's the important part. I think it's crazy, right? It's crazy. How come you're not telling people about this, Mr. Lawyer? Because nobody's going to do anything about it. That's why they're not telling anybody. And making it unlawful for them not to tell anybody is ridiculous, because they're still not going to do anything about it. Frustrating. So that is where things are at. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day. Check out thepeoplespartyofcanada.ca. It's another long video. I thought this was going to be like 15 minutes. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful day.